Hey everybody, welcome back to another all-new X's for Show, X's for Podcast hybrid special. So today is actually Batman Day. I'm Nico, and we're going to be bringing you some unusual coverage. Now, it's been a really long time since I've had an opportunity to just sit back with the microphone and some of my favorite books and talk about the things that made me the fan that I am. Whether it was in the early days talking about X-Men, or as the show would come to evolve, bringing in ideas like Daredevil, it has always been so important that I kind of reflect on where my fandom came from, I think about where it's going, and when I try to think about the ways that has built my fandom, too many times the word fandom, but today is a special day. Like I said, it's Batman Day. So today we're rocking out all the Batman and we're going to have us a good time. Because one of the things that I think everybody recognizes about Batman is the origin is central to the idea of the character. When we think about major characters in comic fiction, we have to examine the characters who have identities that are built in versus the characters whose identities are purposefully mired in confusion. So if we were to start with, let's say, Superman, the whole idea is that guy escapes a burning planet, comes here and, gets to have an amazing life as the savior of the earth. Hey, what's up? But when you think about someone like Wolverine, who Wolverine was, his backstory was always a huge mystery until they kind of revealed it and then decided maybe they didn't reveal all of it and they had to keep working around it. So when you're talking about things like Wolverine origin, trying to establish an origin for this character, or the 30, 40, 50 different origins for the Joker, the three Jokers, you're talking about how origin shapes the way we interact with the character. Wolverine is mysterious by virtue of his mysterious origin, so who Wolverine is even a mystery to him. But Batman isn't a mystery to the internal Bruce Wayne all the time, though take a look at Morrison's run. Batman is a mystery to the outside world, and that's because as the reader, we understand his origin. By demystifying the character in their first place, you're enabling us as the audience to understand the internal logic. With Wolverine, the closest thing you can often get is the sniffing, the sensorial things, where he's interacting with the world around him as a result of his abilities, not as a result of what formed him. So then when we're talking about what formed Batman, Bruce Wayne, we're talking about a bigger picture of character study, because Batman himself has existed in so many iterations, and all you need to do is take a look at the DC shop to understand what I'm talking about. They are constantly dropping new versions of Batman identities and costumes and eras, and one of my favorite things is that, just like this t-shirt that I maybe bought for a hot older boyfriend and stole, you wind up with people having favorite identities, people having favorite versions. I myself am such a Batman Beyond guy because I grew up with Terry, right? And that's even part of the discussion for me. I've never really seen myself as a Robin. I've always kind of felt like I was a Batman, and there's nothing like, just like it's very about the psychology of what makes a Batman different from a Superman, and genderlessly makes it different from a Wonder Woman, because no form of gender binary or non-binary tells you which characters you need to like or love for any reason. So the things that make us who we are, that make us connect to these characters, kind of vary based on the iteration of the character, right? But for me, it always is that central idea of the person who feels that they are responsible for taking care of their family. Now, for that to be such a core identity of Batman, it really needs to go somewhere. It needs to come from something. Now, in the case of Bruce Wayne, it came from losing his parents young and feeling like, the whole world was on his shoulders. In the case of Terry, it is that he comes from a tough single mom household, and he has a shui younger brother who needs a whole lot of attention. Okay, so what are we talking about today then? I would like to take a look at what is my favorite study of origining and re-origining and origineering, right? Ooh, origineering, I'm into it. So, okay, once upon a time, there was a guy named Frank Miller. Now, if you guys checked out my Daredevil work, you guys probably know a little bit about Frank Miller from me talking about him endlessly until like 1990 when we all kind of saw the bigger picture. So 94, because Man Without Fear. So Frank Miller is, the guy who came in and said, let's make comics a different kind of hardcore than they've been. And, he's very much responsible for this idea of the Dark Knight, Bruce Wayne, Batman identity. The Daredevil is a kind of crime man, not just a swashbuckler, right? And he would make that transformation on Daredevil in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And he would make that transformation on Batman throughout the 80s, 90s-ish, and then the 2000s kind of sort of with some questionable stuff. But we're going to be taking a look at Batman Year One to start. Now, that's issues 404 to 407 of Batman, originally released in February 1987 to May 1987. Now, okay, so Batman Year One comes out in 87, and it is just automatically a hit. People love it. It's a thing, right? And there was going to be a story that followed it up in 1980, which was going to be, called Batman 1980, and it was going to be later in 1987. But because it was such a great period for Frank Miller, everything with that Miller era branding was good to go. So instead, just a few months later, in June of 87 through, they monthlyed this guy, in Detective Comics 575 to 578, we got Batman Year 2. From there, it would be a while until Batman Year 3 would come out in the pages of Batman 436 to 439, and that would be in August of 1989 to September of 1989, right? Now, Batman Year One, it really tells like Batman coming to work with the police and Commissioner Gordon, and gives you a bigger picture of what's going on in Gotham. There's some weird moments where like all of a sudden Catwoman is like literally a prostitute, which I have feelings about. Like, I understand where it was a part of the cultural zeitgeist, but even as a kid, I'm like, this feels like, why is the woman being treated this way? And of course, this goes on to be a humongous problem throughout not just Batman, but comics and fandom at large. And so one of the things that I automatically wonder about when we're talking about these sorts of things is how much the identity that we shaped these characters with, this masculine and yonic comparison where Batman is strong and he's a crime fighter and he's powerful, but Catwoman is redressed as a prostitute in her own story. And I think it has to do with the fact that comics as a moving piece, as an identity that was trying to transform, was always looking to do something that was just too extreme for on TV. And I think this really represented a moment where better judgment was lost to progressive storytelling, and it wound up kind of unprogressive. Now, it's really important to examine the role of women in Year One, because the role of women in Year One would later go on to inform the role of women in the rest of the works we're going to be talking about today. Now, let's start again with Batman Year One, big success. Batman Year 2, not the hit Batman Year 1 was, but I would like to point out that something that Batman Year 2 did is Batman Year 2 ultimately would go on to provide some basis for Mask of the Phantasm, my favorite Bat movie to this day. So I think that's pretty cool. But beyond that, Batman Year 3 really focuses on Robin, and it's told in this weird, disjointed way, and it focuses on Dick Grayson's origin just after the loss of Jason Todd. And so it winds up being a little too mired in itself, in what it's doing, and the storytelling is just not my favorite, right? Although the creators on all of these books are, some of the most famous names in comics, especially for their day. So Year 1, big hit. Year 2, Year 3, not my favorite. But so then let's go a little bit further. It is 1995, and we are looking at a very different Bat world, a very different sort of idea of what's going on. And the world is looking for a way to engage with old stories in a new way. You could really see these sorts of seeds going on across the Marvel universe with things like Heroes Reborn just a few years later. And at DC, you also saw the reimagining of so much of the Crisis work in things like Zero Hour. So as the story kind of progresses, DC is seeing that opportunity to do more Emerald Dawn, do more of those kinds of like, let's reframe the conversation around a new origin point. And so we get this unbelievable story in Batman: The Long Halloween from December 1996 to December 1997. Probably one of the most famous comic book stories ever. Certainly one of the most famous in the 90s. And, that's talking about a decade that gave us Marvel versus DC and Onslaught and other questionable stories that have definitely lived on in the cultural zeitgeist. So I grew up on The Long Halloween. Long Halloween is like my favorite book, probably my favorite DC comic ever. I believe in Harvey Dent, and it is such a powerful moment of transformation for my understanding of how you could reflect on the past. As a kid who up to that point was lucky enough to read my dad's Uncanny X-Men's, I would read through these old books, and they were in language that didn't always kind of relate to a 10-year-old, and I don't think it ever did. You know, when I go back and I read those books and Chris Claremont is like, the proverbial... No, it's a little too Stan Lee thinking that Thor spoke Shakespearean. Yeah, of course. Norse gods, they speak Shakespearean Middle English, of course. So with The Long Halloween, what they sought to do was they sought to tell a digestible version of the Batman mythos piece by piece, block by block, assemblage by assemblage, and the ultimate outcome winds up being one of the most culturally relevant moments for Batman in some time. Now, it also sought to be a continuation of Year One. That said, while it is a continuation of Year One, there are some threads that maybe don't continue on exactly in the same way. Catwoman gets a much better turn in the pages of The Long Halloween, and of course, that's because a decade more time had evolved not just the character, but comic storytelling as a whole to somewhere much better. Now, it wouldn't be comics if they didn't say, well, that was a hit, let's do a sequel. So they said, what if we retell Year 3? Just like we retold Year 2 in the pages of The Long Halloween, what if we retell the idea of how Robin came to interact with Batman over in something we're going to call Dark Victory? Dark Victory would run from November 99 to December of 2000, and it would be by the same creative team, and it tells the next part of this reimagining of the Batman origin. So Year 1 gets a Year 2 that really wasn't meant to be Year 2, and then it gets an intentional Year 3 to consistently diminishing returns. That tells them we should keep Year 1, which was a success, and then we should make a new Year 2, Long Halloween, which they follow up with a new Year 3, Dark Victory. But then they decide, but this is a trilogy, isn't it? We're not going to stick a Frank Miller book at the front of that trilogy. Instead, we're going to come up with a prequel. But not just any prequel. No. See, the creative team that had done The Long Halloween and Dark Victory, Loeb and Sale, they had worked on 3 one-shots, Legend of the Dark Knight Halloween specials, 1, 2, and 3 from 1993, 1994, and 1995. So they actually had like 120 pages to lock away into a trade and say, hey, look, it's kind of Year 1 to The Long Halloween, but not really. And so one of the things that was so shocking to me is I knew all about Year 1, and I vaguely understood Year 2. Year 3 was a mystery to me until I started a project to do this a couple of months ago. I wanted to reread Long Halloween for Halloween. I wanted to reread Dark Victory. I wanted to read When in Rome as an adult for the first time, getting all excited about the last Halloween, which is coming out. There's also been Long Halloween Noir. There have been a couple of animated movies. There's a ton of material out there for this. So I sit down and I begin to do all of this work. I come to discover that it is now called Batman Haunted Knight, and it contains those 3 Legends of the Dark Knight specials, and that's this prequel. So I sit down and I build this out, and I come to realize that Year 1 is Haunted Knight, Year 2 is Long Halloween, and Year 3 is sort of Dark Victory. And when you examine how all of this comes together, there are some really interesting things that kind of come out from this. You know, if you start by reading it in order, if you read it the way it was meant to be released, you're going to find that there's a certain sense of uneven climb and fall, because when you read things that are being repurposed, the ultimate way they embody is always going to be a little different. So if you're going to try and read this along, I recommend reading Year 1, then Haunted Knight, Year 2, then Long Halloween, Year 3, then Dark Victory, and reward yourself with Long Halloween Noir, followed by Catwoman When in Rome. Catwoman When in Rome is by the same creative team, and it is splendid. So you should definitely check it out. Okay, so when I started with Year 1 and this big project, I had so much excitement for the storytelling choices, for the beautiful artistic direction. There are so many unbelievable uses of the crime blotter, of using visual identity, having Jim Gordon come to Gotham by train, getting to the city. You are really putting him in the thick of things, but he has his wife fly, right? Because he wants to keep her out. There's this idea that immediately women have to be protected in this story, right? And so that's not a bad thing that the characters here want to show protection. That's one of the things that I said is a highlighting important element that goes on to define who Batman is from day one. But part of what that means is because year one keeps women out of the role of anything, you kind of wind up with an uneven story when it comes to the gender identity. The identity here, you can smell the dripping sweat. Yes. And so it's a little tough at times, especially because we keep examining what I'm going to have to refer to at this point as just 80s man pain. You get so much of Gordon versus Bruce and this idea of staying pure in an era of corruption. The idea that Gordon is having a problem with Flass. He has a bad commissioner. Dent can't catch a break. If you're a good person, you're down on your luck till it corrupts you, unless you're Gordon or Bruce Wayne. And this idea winds up overwhelming the story enormously. Barbara doesn't really do a whole lot. Selina doesn't do a whole lot. It winds up feeling a little bit less luscious for the character study than I'd like. There's also this very funny line in 405 where Miller takes shots at Disney in a book owned by Warner Brothers during essentially the era of Superman movies. So I always think that there's this unevenness to the vision. However, one of the things that is actually really interesting about this character study of the men kind of fall into the same compartmentalizations is that Gordon thinks that Dent is Batman. So what happens when you keep putting the same type of character in the same situation and giving them the same stimulus? You wind up getting to see the way they will react a little bit, almost like Court of Owl's Amazing Batman for those of you that are Snyder fans, right? But one of the things that this book also does is it sets up the idea of hyperviolence throughout Batman bombing the city as a major motif for this new era of Batman. Of course, with a character like Batman who's been around for so many decades, well before this story, which itself is now decades old, a number of these stories had already been hinted at or hit on, but one of the things that's important to remember is that Batman Year One isn't just retelling them, it winds up ushering in a new age of Bat stories. So everything from this winds up being so central to what comes next. From here, we do have one woman who represents something I'm not crazy about. Essen, she is the person that Gordon is kind of having an affair with. It's not my favorite. She winds up just representing nothing important. And in that, I do wonder about how much we can even really talk about a book like Batman Year One, which wasn't intended to rewrite the rules on Batman at large, but rather was seeking to tell a story that would go in a time, this classic moment in his origin. Now, contrastingly, Loeb and Sale were doing something a little bit different. With their work on Haunted Night, which was, of course, originally Legends of the Dark Knight Halloween Specials 1, 2, and 3 from 93, 94, 95, they are much more focused on telling a specific story about Batman in this motif. With Year One, you're telling a big picture about Batman in Gotham. You're not really telling the Gotham world. You're telling Batman in this picture. It's so specifically focused on one thing, one guy, one way. And for all the shit that I'm giving Miller, it is a powerful story. There are some unbelievable visual beats. The art team just knocks it out of the park. The writing can be very tight. And it's just one of those things where not every story has aged with the quality that you hope it will. To that point, I actually think that the Haunted Night books age really well. Specifically, 1993's Fears is my favorite of the three. It comes across probably the best. I think one of the things that works here is that the iteration of Scarecrow that is presented here is just utterly terrifying. It's terrifying in a way that Year One never is. Year One has a lot of things going for it, namely that it's a fun crime book, but it doesn't ever give me like Batman fear. You know what I mean? Like there's that level of like Batman is the guy. There is that level of Batman is the human creature that puts on the monster suit and fights the monsters. And in Year One, all of the monsters look like Bruce, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there is something powerful about the surrender to fear, the nightmare moment that is stepping into this this one-shot annual. However, the first thing I would like to say is while there is a little bit more Alfred action that I'm a fan of in Haunted Night than there is in Year One, Alfred's just sort of a background player there. Batman has no idea that he is being duped by a woman, Jillian. She is getting too close, too fast, and Alfred can totally sniff it out. And essentially, we just write her off, get rid of her. Seriously, not a problem. But one of the things that I did notice was that this first one, which I did like the most, was 78 pages. That's like 10 issues of an Unlimited comic now, like an Infinite comic over on Marvel. That's like 7 months of Wayne Family Adventures. My goodness. It's a little longer than it should be, but one of the best images that comes from the entire book is the bat signal being turned into a jack-o'-lantern. It's so cool. It's shocking. It's fun. And then rolling into Madness the next year, there's a sudden art change despite being the same art team. It obviously comes from the fact that that first one definitely had power. It had emotion, and so we're always trying to up the ante a little bit. I'm interested in how these big, broad style, over-the-top splash pages that wind up filling out so much of Madness don't ever stop. They're fun, they're really cool, but because this one is actually, and I just want to update, the first one is 84 pages, the second one is 52 pages, and then the third one is 48 pages. This one is still 52 pages, but with so many big splashes, it throws it off a little bit. There's a lot of things with Mad Hatter tying into things like Martha and Thomas. You know, there's all things, you know, we all go to Pearls to Zorro over it. But like one of the things that gets me about this story is that it's a legitimately fine issue, but it really doesn't accomplish much that isn't done elsewhere in this collection. So it's not that Madness doesn't have anything going for it, but Madness ultimately does surrender to itself. However, in 1995, Ghosts, I really felt the art was immediately cleaner and a little bit sharper. Maybe it was 2 years of experience. Maybe it was getting ready for Long Halloween. But we get some really fun Penguin here. There is some weird stuff that surprised me here. And at a really weird rate, right? So this book kind of suffers from an unusual page curve. At about 15 of the 48 pages of story in, we're still establishing that the villain is going to be against Batman. So I like the third one a lot, but I do wonder ultimately if the third one is a result of getting ready for Long Halloween. So maybe Ghosts, the 1995 special, has a little bit less meat to it as a result. So looking back at these two origins, Batman Year One tells a really incomplete vision of what Batman should be today. It gives us ideas of the internal logic behind the character, but it does it in such a one-note way, one voice. While there are other amazing characters and a lot of good things to be said, I would still be forced to give Year One, from a modern perspective, reading it, about a B+, though I can see how many times throughout history scholars gave it an A+. That said, it really only tells us Batman one way, whereas the work over on Haunted Night It tells us a lot more of what's going on in Gotham. It gives us a better sense of the night, the fear, the bad guys. But it does it with so much more mania and yet lack of grace that I find myself unable to give it the same strong review. I'm going to have to say that it gets like a B, B minus, and at best I feel like you could have given that first one an A. Like the Wizard magazine, that one came out, and everybody must have had the best review for it. And then, obviously just a little bit diminishing quality there. What winds up happening, though, is Batman Year 2, which was originally Batman 1980. This could not have been the original draft in my mind. It feels like it comes so much on the heels of Year 1. They must have done a little bit of editing there. The main bad guy of this is Reaper. We have Rachel Caspian and Mr. Caspian, and Rachel is Batman's love interest, and Reaper is her dad. And it's an interesting story because I'm thrown by how much Reaper is just tearing through people. He basically has Batman's origin, kinda, and Batman and he just go back and forth at it. It's just one of those, no, I cut him worse. No, he cut me worse. It doesn't really bring me anywhere exciting. The hardest part about this one is I truly wonder if when this book came out, if perhaps this was a little bit less a common type of story. Batman Year 2 has so many nice moments, so many great art grabs, but I don't necessarily feel like we are progressing here. Batman Year 2 has a lot of heart, but it doesn't have the execution rate, and I feel like if it had been called Batman 1980, if it had just been some story from some year, and not meant to be the follow-up to one of the most important Batman stories ever, right afterward, it wouldn't throw me off so bad. But there is something a little, almost hard to talk for long about for me, about this story, and I would love to hear anybody's opinion, have you come on, we can talk about it, have a great time. But that does get us to Long Halloween, perhaps one of the books that I've read the most, one of the comics I've written the most notes on. This book starts with the Magia, and it just goes full force there. There are so many moments here with the Falcons and with the bigger picture of crime in Gotham, whether it's Harvey Dent and his role here. At the end of the day, what we're really reading is the Falcone family and the way they wind up going up against the other crime families of Gotham. And we see the Maronis, we see a number of Batman villains getting more involved with crime than I would expect. As I reread this, one of the things that was so cool is if this was originally envisioned as a follow-up to Year 1, the elevation of Catwoman here, amazing. She is so cool right off the bat in this story. I am a big fan. Now, one of the things is that it's called The Long Halloween, and it follows along a calendar going holiday to holiday, and it starts on Halloween, which kind of makes this the fourth Halloween story from the Legend of the Dark Knight series, right? Kind of, sort of, but, it's really long. So then, as the story continues, one of the things that we get a very strong vision of is Harvey Dent and Gilda and the tragedy of their marriage. We get the idea that Gordon, for as much as he is, of course, married to his wife and now very clearly faithful, he is struggling with also being married to Gotham. There are so many people involved in keeping Gotham safe, whether it's working with Arkham, working with Batman, working with Dent, that Gordon is feeling the weight of the city itself rests in him. One of the reasons that's so important is because as we see the character continue to evolve his understanding of his part in Gotham, he comes to realize that the best he can do is facilitate from the sidelines, and it's guys like Batman that have to get in there and do some of the really horrifying stuff. Not that he would ever shy away from trying to stop Holiday. He is very insistent on trying to stop this killer who is going around and murdering on holidays. But one of the ways in which this is so totally not Batman Year 2 is Batman Year 2 is very specifically Again, a kind of man-pain story. It's the Reaper versus Batman. It's one-on-one. But Batman The Long Halloween, by being 13 issues, is a widescreen attempt at absorbing everything that makes Bat canon. This doesn't just focus on characters like Joker and Catwoman, but we see incredible character deep dives like Solomon Grundy, who is a big favorite of mine, and Poison Ivy winds up playing a really unique role here. I am always, every time I reread this, I'm always like, how is Poison Ivy in so much of this? And it's always important to remember that as a reader, when you read this big long story, you might forget that Falcone sent Ivy after Bruce, right? You might miss these elements where, Poison Ivy is being used as absolutely a feminine mystique character. She is here just to undermine Bruce's sense of self with her feminine wiles, but that is her power set. So, DC, you either need to update that, or that's going to keep being stories that we see elements of, especially at this point, like 30 years ago, right? One of the things that I also love this book for is the color work throughout is used to clearly define the moments and times where things are going on. As you read through this and you come to understand that the women play a humongous role here, Carla, Sophia, Catwoman, whether they are members of the crime families or just a kind of a criminal, these women wind up having so much agency throughout this story. And as the story continues into issues like St. Patrick's Day, April Fool's Day, and Mother's Day, it is startling, right? When you get into Mother's Day, which is the July issue from 97, my notes even say it's been a roller coaster. When I think about reading Batman as a child, I think about poring over this particular volume, and here I am at page 192 of 386, roughly halfway through the series, and I have so much to think about. Because when you continue to think about things like where 1997 puts you, it's actually a really interesting thing to contrast where this is coming out. When you're talking about 1997, that's Toni Braxton, Spice Girls, Bad Boy Records, Hanson, Mariah Carey, Boyz II Men, Elton John. It's between Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. This is such a cultural turning point. America Online is putting the internet in people's homes, and we are seeing this story that is trying to retell everything you know about Batman in one book. And as you continue to cycle into Mother's Day and thinking about how the impact of losing his mother affected Bruce, you're immediately hit with Father's Day in the following issue. And part of what I think is so important when you think about the identity of fathers and Father's Day in the nature of Batman is we do recognize that Batman is a father in so many ways, to the Robins, to many of the younger heroes of the DC universe. So when you're reading something about Bruce dealing with his lack of fathering in a world where he does not yet have his wards, it creates an understanding of the fact that what we associate with Batman, oh, he is a father, he has wards, is not always true, and the accessibility of those stories still proves necessary to the argument as to why he's a good father. Seeing him without children allows us to compare him to when he has them and allows us to see how he grows. Of course, don't get me wrong, he's still Batman/Bruce Wayne, and he still makes some really troubling parenting decisions. There's also a moment in Independence Day, issue 10, that really, really fucks with your head. If you know the ending, when you get to the moment where Gilda says, "What will it take to get my Harvey Dent back?" It's so crazy to think about the amount of planning that went into this. Some writers like to know the ending of a mystery before they start it. Some writers like to wait and let it come to them. But there is something so powerful about the intentionality behind this story. And I think, when you think about the intrinsic romanticization of having Catwoman and Bruce and Batman on a page together, and then you use their colors. You use that big blue flowingness and the black accents for Batman, and you use the purple and the grays for Catwoman. What you wind up doing is further exploring how one of the things that in 4 issues, both year 1 and year 2 couldn't accomplish, is they couldn't accomplish this level of character study. By having so many issues, we're able to see the things that make this a bigger picture of the entire Bat universe, not just a slice of a single moment. As the story continues out and we get to issue 13, Punishment, I love this ending. I do, however, think that it does eventually kind of get to like all the rogues are there and, we're in Arkham and it's all crazy. It does sometimes start to feel like the real holiday is the murders we made all along the way. It is great to see I believe in Gotham City, Jim Gordon. I believe in Batman, Bruce Wayne. I believe in Harvey Dent. This idea that there are people and what they represent to this story, that they are this big myth, this legend. I think when you're talking about re-examining Batman from such a large perspective, and you're trying to put into consideration that this whole thing played out accidentally from 1987 to 2000, and now here we are still talking about it 25 years later, it really does talk a bit about how Batman, for having 100 years of character at this point, and a million billion comics, he's kind of something different to everyone. And so the iterations of Batman that last the longest tend to be the iterations that encompass the most elements. I'll admit, even though I have some notes about how year 1 plays out, one of the things about year 1 that's definitely important to consider is that it shows a multitude of Bruce's reactions. That at least hits something different in people who identify with that version of Bruce. While I do think there is something to be said for the far more exquisite use of character, seeing such a beautiful rogues gallery come in throughout the pages of Long Halloween, it can be really tough to go back and reread year 2 after reading Long Halloween, which is why I do recommend it comes first. Year 2, I give a B-, I think, at the end. Maybe a C realistically, but I'd like to be really positive on it because it never meant to be what it is. Long Halloween is an A for me. It really hits all the right notes, all the right profiles, and I just really think it is an important work that helps us come to understand how Batman engages with a bigger picture of his own universe. I feel terrible. Batman Year 3 took me forever to get through, 436 to 439. It was just not my favorite. I love Marv Wolfman. I love him a lot. Seeing the story of how Dick Grayson lost his family, it feels complicated. My final thought was year 1 is itself, year 2 is an accident, and year 3 is a frustration. This was jumping around too much across too many points. We get this idea of this guy Zuko who's involved with the death of Dick Grayson's circus family, but my biggest problem was that I felt throughout the whole thing like the two characters never really came together, Dick and Bruce. They just sort of agreed to Batman and Robin at the end, but I didn't feel like it was an earned moment. I wonder how much that has to do with a guy like Marv Wolfman has been attached to these characters for so long. Perhaps he remembers moments that were properly in the cultural zeitgeist at the time, so this read like an all powerful, no filler, no fluff. It's just giving you what you need and not extra background. For me, though, it ultimately felt like trying to balance Nightwing as equally important as Batman, and it should because it's his story, but there wasn't room then for this to be Batman Year 3 if what it needed to be was Robin Year 0. And I understand that that's like an unfair thing to say when you're looking back at a creator's work, 30-something years later. But without the bigger context of Jason Todd's death, kind of a huge clunker for me. Without really understanding who Nightwing would come on to become, really kind of a clunker for me. Even if you don't love Year 1 or Year 2, they at least read pretty self-contained. Year 3 benefits and probably requires extra knowledge to fulfill and fill out in such a dynamic way. So for me, I'm just going to out there, Marv Wolfman, what a genius of writing Nightwing, but my goodness, this is like a C- for me. This was not where it was at. But conversely, as a kid, I thought Dark Victory was better than Long Halloween. I was one of those kids that was always like, the sequel's better. And it's, probably because like the Very Brady sequel's better. And so I was lied to and made to think things. And I'm not saying that Dark Victory is the Weekend at Bernie's 2 to Weekend at Bernie's 1. I do think perhaps that Dark Victory represents the embodiment of hyper sequelization in this period. I do want to take a moment just to say, because it's going to be, important to always remember the creators. Batman Year One was written by Frank Miller with art by David Mazzucchelli, and that was, of course, Batman 404 to 407 in February to May '87. Batman Year Two was written by Mike W. Barr, illustrated by Alan Davis, Paul Neary, Alfredo Alcala, Mark Farmer, and Todd McFarlane, and it ran in Detective Comics 575 to 578 from June to September of 1987, originally, of course, titled Batman 1980. Batman Year 3 was written by Marv Wolfman and penciled by Pat Broderick. That was Batman 436 through 439 in August and September of 1989. And then everything for Long Halloween is Loeb and Sale, right? There's also, of note, Batman Year Zero, written by Scott Snyder and James Tynion, with artwork by Greg Capullo, Danny Mickey, Raphael Albuquerque, and that ran in Batman 0 and 21 through 33 of the second volume after the New 52 in July 2013 to July 2014. And the hard thing to feel about Dark Victory is that every page is intentional. As I was trying to get through this one, which feels much more erratic, you find that the story is always just trying to keep itself going one more issue. I personally did love this one as a child, and as an adult, I'm still pretty positive on it, I think. But part of where the story kind of goes a little wrong for me is what it asks us to maybe take away from Long Halloween, where it says maybe that moment wasn't the deepest moment in Long Halloween, or it asks us to take a big step back from the finale moments in some ways. Harvey Dent being a victim in Long Halloween is so central to it being a great book. So Harvey Dent being just like a street rogue, it's just not my moment. But I do love the Sophia of it all. Super great. The idea that Holiday is no longer going to be the focus, that there's a second Holiday. That's really interesting for me, because Dark Victory feels like it is such a copycat of Long Halloween, and for good reason. One of the things that Dark Victory definitely falls victim to is it goes on for, like I said, a little too long. And part of what takes it too long is that it is hoping to capture what wasn't in Long Halloween. We get a new district attorney, Janice Porter, who I actually think is so clearly the weakest woman of the later era of this. She is actually just here for Dent. She's his like love puppet, and she can't believe he would turn on her. Oh my gosh. I think ultimately, when you're talking about a guy who would make a jump to television, or back to television, actually, because Jeff Loeb had already been a TV guy, I wonder how often it can be difficult to stay in comics all the time. Like when you're like, oh no, I have to get back to, making scripts, real things now. Not that I feel that way about comics, but I think when one pays, 5 figures and one pays 7 figures, you go where the money is. I think Dark Victory, the ending is so rushed and so manic, but with too many pages. Dark Victory is a tough read, because if I read it in the right mood, I'm going to give it a B+, but I'm more likely to give it a B. Now, that said, when we're talking about the page content, yikes. Year 1, Year 2, and Year 3 fit inside Dark Victory. They fit inside The Long Halloween. So it feels unfair to always compare these ideas, but when we're looking at Batman Day 2024, right? Why is this all here? Batman Day represents the idea that this fictional character has become so important, and Batman himself represents logic in darkness. He is the world's greatest detective, even if he's a guy running around dressed as a bat in a cowl. So, what are we looking to gain from something like re-examining Batman's origin for the zillionth, trillionth time, like they just did in The Batman by Matt Reeves, and is now getting The Penguin, which is about to debut to unbelievable reviews. Very excited. Can't wait to talk about that here on the channel. I think I'm left realizing that the mystery of Batman is in constantly never knowing what's next, right? With Wolverine, there's still so much mystery to who he was. And maybe you want to talk about a science character, like the Fantastic Four. Well, science is going to keep evolving, and we're going to keep getting cool new ideas in science. So automatically, we're going to keep getting cool new Fantastic Four stories. Spider-Man. Spider-Man is stuck in this dual, growing up, maybe not, maybe he will. He's always a kid, but he's always an adult, and now he's a photographer or a professor, but he's still just a kid, and they're always going to bring him back to that. With Spider-Man, the excitement knowing what's around the corner. In that way, one of the things that Batman has sought to do the best is, despite having such clearly examinable origins, Batman keeps the promise of tomorrow more exciting than what's under the cowl at any point. I think that's the reason we have Batman Day, because Batman has managed to stay one step ahead of, I think, comics' greatest criminal, disinterest. For that reason, I'm hoping that this inspired anybody to read any of these 6 works. Make sure that if you do, maybe you subscribe to DC Infinite, or maybe you pick them up in some cool new trade form. But I would love it if you also went out and supported your LCS by buying the coming out now Last Halloween. That is the final work in this Long Halloween trilogy series. I do want to say, though, really sadly, that Tim Sale is no longer with us. So Jeff Loeb will be completing this with other brilliant voices in comics, and I, for one, can't wait. Now, if you want to check out more of what we do on this channel, you can check it out at X's for Podcast or X's for Show on all your social media. As for me, I'm Nico, and you guys can check me out at Nico Action. That's NicoAction. And if you want to know more about this incredible thing we call Batman, make sure to walk into a comic shop and pick up a book. Because one of the things that I love, so much is I love that we live in the era of amazing comic book movies and amazing comic book TV shows, but it's really exciting to see that there are still awesome Batman stories coming out right now, like Chip Zdarsky's. I know we're getting a new run on Detective Comics in the near future. They've announced some incredible new Batman miniseries that are going to be coming out in the next couple of months. So don't just buy the old stuff, buy some new stuff, support your LCS, and like, comment, and subscribe, because we love you. Don't forget to stay safe, be brave, and evolve daily. And if you guys can do that, then we're going to see you. I'm Nico Action, and we'll see you.